Hi guys, it's Luetin and Levelcap here, and we're back for another episode of On the Level. And funnily enough, today we're going to be talking about Aftermath. And Aftermath, I think it's fair to say, has really struck a chord with Battlefield players. It's really given us a lot of new things to think about and brought a lot of people back to the basics of what Battlefield is all about. It came out yesterday for PC and Xbox Premium users. So Level, from what you've played of it so far, what's your thoughts about how we're going with Aftermath?
I think it's absolutely phenomenal, and it's completely due to the map design. I mean, we could talk about how brilliant Scavenger is. Personally, I've actually gotten a little bit bored of Scavenger, but the Conquest maps on larger 64 player or even the regular size Conquest on 32 players are just absolutely so well designed. They look great. They flow really well. The gameplay is just absolutely phenomenal on the maps, and it's kind of like what I wish Battlefield has always been. And sadly, we've had to wait for Aftermath for maps like this to come out, but now that they're here, it's just an absolute pleasure to play on them.
I think it's a real positive though, because I'm sure that DICE have got so much negative feedback from obviously Armored Kill and people really not feeling that map for various different reasons, map or the package there. And I think with Aftermath, the amount of positivity that it's even had in this first week. Now, that's the difficult thing, is that it's been like the first week. It's really not been out for a length of time. So I think we need to wait a few weeks and see whether the positivity and whether people really enjoy it, whether it has that sort of staying power, because people can often be bowled over by new things straight away just because they're new. So we need to wait and see whether people really feel that they're good. Like you say, Scavenger is a little bit boring already, perhaps, but then again, Gun Game is the same. I think Gun Game, it was kind of fun for a little bit, but it's not something I would really seek to play out every now and again now. You know, it's not really that big on. But with Rush and Conquest, definitely. I think from what you say, though, with Conquest for console players, definitely it's always going to be that problem of not having enough people, and I still find that it's the case. But I still think that you do get some good games there. I said with Armored Kill that they were a little bit too big, and I think that was definitely the case. But with this one for Aftermath, I think it's much better. Rush, for me, though, stands out way above it for console. I think just because of the amount of gameplay, that sort of intense firefighting gameplay that you get. But you were saying a bit about Conquest and how crazy the games have been for that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, and more on your point too, I've always found that each expansion has had some sort of little gimmicky pull towards it to try and get people in. This one was Scavenger, which actually ended up being a lot better than I thought it was going to be. But coming back to Conquest and Rush style games, those are the core gameplay mechanics, and that's what I honestly was looking forward to the most, because I think those are the most well-balanced games. And it's like, well, if you're doing something well, just keep doing more of that, you know, and that's what I was looking forward to. And yeah, these Conquest maps have these huge cityscapes. You know, you got big buildings next to you for really the first time ever in Battlefield. You've had a few here and there on other maps, but even on the Paris maps, you know, you didn't have giant skyscrapers all over the place. These ones not only have giant skyscrapers everywhere, but you can fly in between them with the helicopters on Marquez, Monolith. You can really get on top of a lot of the taller buildings. And maps like Epicenter, you know, they provide this huge urban combat that I realize Battlefield has urban scenes and scenarios in it, but just the scale of this, all of a sudden you get a 64-player server with a crap load of people that are actually fighting it out in some sort of like reasonable manner between all the city blocks, and it feels like an all-out war going on in this giant city.
Yeah, and the amount of flanking as well. I do think it's really interesting the way they design the maps, because when you think about maps like Grand Bazaar, those kind of concentrated, close bottleneck maps, you don't really have any opportunity to move around. But with these maps, you really do. It gives you lots of opportunity. So as defenders or attackers on any base, whether that was for Conquest or Rush, you need to really think about where people are coming from more. So I think, again, for larger player counts like 32, 64, again, that's going to give you loads more opportunities, because you're not just being funneled down like a death zone. You actually have the ability to move around and try and do other things and get behind these guys. So it means that they can't just sit there with an LMG firing down a straight line or sniping from a mile away at people who have got nowhere else to go. You can actually move around, which is really nice. And Talara, I think, is a real sort of it's the epitome of that, particularly on Rush. And I know you said you didn't have a huge amount of sort of so far with Rush, but Rush on Talara I played last night. It's a really interesting one. It really is, because you really struggle to move forwards in a straight line through that map. You really have to move around and flank and get around your enemy, and being aware of that as a defender or an attacker is really interesting. But just the way that map is laid out is fascinating compared to other rush maps, because it tends to be so linear, and this one is really not.
Yeah, that's Tala, I think, stands out from the other maps in that it's much more open, even though it seems sort of like you're in this smaller city with smaller alleyways and stuff like that. You can really go in just about any direction and find a path. And there's so many paths that one's definitely different in terms of the quantity of flanking routes that you have compared to the other maps. And what I really like that they've done is adding those little explosive canisters, allowing you to have those little extra pathways through. It was like our predictions talking about the maps having changeable environments that might change due to the earthquakes, and this is just changed due to if you want to blow up a canister and go through a little path, make your own little path through the buildings. It's a little more scripted than, say, Bad Company 2 path making. But at the same time, I was playing yesterday in Epicenter, and there's a huge firefight going down this one alley, and I'm like, well, I could either join the giant Zerg over there and just be sort of one of the many, or I could blow a hole in this little door here, go through and start flanking the enemy. And I was the first one to do that, and I came through and I got a whole bunch of kills, and I felt like I made a big difference. It was really cool.
I think as well, I was really pleased with how spot on our predictions were, because we made predictions, three months ago or more. It was like a long time. And they really were bang on. We were talking about like close quarter vehicles and little things only having lightweight vehicles, really intense urban combat from broken buildings and all this kind of stuff. It's really panned out well. It's really sort of hit the nail on the head of exactly how we wanted it to be. And I'm so pleased with all of it. I think it plays out really well. One question: Conquest Assault, do you think it's a shame that they didn't include that on the other maps as well? Because it's such a good classic Battlefield game mode. It really feels a little bit of a shame for me that it didn't play out, because I always feel with Conquest Assault there's a bit more of a struggle. It's not so much of a kind of crazy free-for-all run around. It really feels like one team is trying to take over and destroy the other team.
It is interesting that they only chose to do it on Tala Market. Normally, with DICE, at least with Battlefield 3, they seem to try and incorporate every game mode to every map, at least with each expansion. And it really doesn't bother me that they've only chosen to do it on Tala Market. Maybe the game designers looked at the map and they're like, this would work well with Conquest Assault. Maybe they tried to look at the other maps and decide how to figure out, and ultimately decided that it just really wasn't set up for Conquest Assault that well. And that's something that you saw in Bad Company 2 a lot. You had maps that were only rush maps, and they worked great for rush, but you couldn't really do Conquest with that. And I think there's just some maps that you can't really finagle into working with these other game modes.
It's true, and I think it works very well on Tala. It's interesting as well because you've got that nice orbital road which runs all the way around in the central point, so it works quite well as a Conquest Assault map because you can really be quite dynamic in how you move around. It's not like some of the other maps where perhaps, for example, if you imagine on Azadi, that big main palace area, it's such a dominating presence in the entire map environment. Perhaps certain areas would become more dominant. Perhaps the kind of more sort of equal layout that there is on Tala sort of presents itself a little bit better. Maybe that's why they decided to go with it. But I do like the kind of multi-level structure effect and so on that you get with a lot of the maps. When you think about, for example, Azadi Palace, and like you were saying, it's really nice that they have one main focus point for each map. It really makes a feature of it. And I said this in my videos, was that when you think about Azadi Palace or the Markaz Monolith, those structures are so huge. You can end up having these kind of almost mini games within these buildings for the whole round. Like Azadi Palace, you could quite happily fight all the way around and inside that building for the whole round and never even go anywhere else. It's such a massive thing.
And the cityscapes just look so good. I mean, I'm not saying that the devs haven't put a lot of time into their other maps and crafting them, but these maps have just sort of, they really capture this city post-earthquake, this environment, and they throw you right into the middle of it. And you feel like you're in this giant urban jungle, and for all intents and purposes, you are, and you can run up into tiny little overlooks. You can hide down in dark areas. And especially, Azadi Palace or Markaz Monolith going up into the big torn out part of the giant skyscraper there.
Yeah.
It's like this own battle zone right inside the building, and then you go outside and it's like there's still a whole city around you. It feels grand on like sort of a new scale, but still within the tight confines of an urban environment.
I think it's great that you have that kind of gameplay style, and I think it's one that people really, really enjoy. When you think about other maps, think about stuff like Oman. Oman works really interestingly well when it comes to these kind of similar styles, and so does Karkan. They have this kind of urban combat environment where you're multi-level, you're sort of in and around all the rubble, and I think that's why people compared it to Karkan so much, because Karkan is so similar in the way it has the burnt out streets, the broken buildings, there's rubble all over the place. So people really took that gameplay style and it's kind of run on with these, but they've expanded the map and made it bigger, made it more interesting, lots more things to do, different routes to take. So they've kind of taken one thing that they knew people loved and then expanded on it in a really, really fantastic way. I think that's a good sign, because they've gone through these other DLCs. We had, of course, Close Combat and Armored Kill, and they've obviously taken feedback and thoughts from that. Now, if this one has gone down so well, like I said earlier, it really, for me, bodes well that they're going to take this on board and go, well, okay, people really love Karkan, they've compared it to this, they love this, so maybe when we make the next Battlefield, we will take that as a strong element to build like a foundation to build everything else up on.
Yeah, I really hope with any future Battlefield titles, they just take this expansion and use that as a basis for building upon. Rather than throwing 4 gigantic armored maps at us, every Battlefield game has to have the giant armored map and then the tiny, ridiculous close quarter map. But I think the meat of the maps should really be more like these 4 maps that we got with this expansion. I think they provide the greatest kind of gameplay, a nice balance between armor and infantry. And then if you want a little bit more of the intense armor action, then you get like maybe an Armored Kill style map. And then if you really want just only infantry, then you get a little close quarter style map. But for the most part, I think everybody can be pretty happy within these kind of maps that they've delivered here.
I'll tell you something else as well. Do you feel like you miss the air combat very much? I mean, we have the scout helicopters, but that's it. I have to say, out of this entire week, or it must be towards 10 days or so, I don't know, no, it's a week or something, of gameplay now, it hasn't really occurred to me, and no one has mentioned it to me like, oh, it really sucks that we don't have jets or attack helicopters. No one is, no single person has mentioned it to me at all.
You know, I've actually been of the opinion for a long time now that I think they should just get rid of jets in Battlefield. And a lot of people hate this, but I think they're just too hard to balance is the problem. You put these devices in the game that can basically be horrible in the hands of the wrong person, and everybody's like, oh, jets, they're pointless, you don't need them. Or if you put them in the hands of the right person, and I've seen the right people with them, they can basically win the round on their own. In a 64-player game, they can cause so much damage in one of these things that it's just ridiculous to have them in the game. They can take out all the air and then start working on the armor. And I think it's just too hard to balance them. Either you got to make them so bad that even the best player can't really do much with them, or you got to make them, there's really not an alternative to that. So I honestly like the Bad Company 2 balance, where you had a chopper here and there. You only had usually one or so, and if you had some good people on the ground, you could still take it out. It couldn't just dominate the whole map,
I think
hands down.
I think it focuses people's attention much more, and I really feel like that's what's happened with Aftermath, is everyone's attention is focused much more on what's actually happening on the ground, where people are moving to, the objectives they're trying to take, and they're not constantly thinking, oh crap, there's something coming in on us from here or wherever, or there's a heli in the air, blah, blah, blah. Everyone's just focused on the ground. And the scout helicopters, again, they'll take out a few bits and pieces, but often, most of the time, they're shooting at each other or trying to take down a tank. And again, they don't have a massive unbalanced impact in the game. They're a little bit of an irritation, but not too much, really.
No, I think they're balanced really well, actually, because I was spending quite a bit of time flying them around. And you're right, I really did spend a lot of the time worrying about the other helicopters. And in between that, maybe I could do a little swoop in, take out a few infantry here and there. But because it's so urban, you really don't just have a giant open landscape to pick and choose your prey. So it's nicely balanced compared to some of the other maps.
And the other thing is, I have to say, there has been many opportunities which have been fantastic. I've had a lot of fun RPG scout helicopter kills where you get like 3 or 4 kills. Some guys, they're swooping down, they're trying to be cool, they try to go for the objective, bam, they're just gone in one hit, and that's always a really fun one to get. But out of all the maps so far that you've played, do you have a favorite? Do you think one that plays out particularly better than the others?
I like Azadi Palace for tank gameplay and infantry gameplay. Epicenter is just the king for infantry gameplay, and I love flying the helicopter on Markov's Monolith. I'm not crazy about Talam Market. I love how it looks visually, but it's just a little too chaotic for my liking. I find that I just get shot in the back far too much in that map. I like maps where I can really plan the engagements, or I know, like, it's the flanking routes are more simple, so it's a little more predictable.
I think I would definitely put Marquez as the top for rush gameplay for myself. I really love it. It's really fantastic the way the game flows for Marquez on rush. It's really excellent from start to end. There's lots of really interesting engagements, and it really leads you around the map. It's not linear. You start off, you go around to the left of the main building, then you come back on yourself, then you go finally through to the bank, and it just takes you on a really fantastic trip all the way through the map. I think Azadi is definitely the best for Conquest. I think it really is. I love the scale and the multi-split levels and the tank engagements and the huge palace being this main base there. That's really good. But I really do think, I have to say, that Talar, I've had some alright games on it, but for the most part, I just find it's too chaotic, like you say. I find there's a lot of horrific bottleneck engagements where there's sort of multiple people coming down. I've shown some gameplay of this where I'm just sitting there with a bipod LNG, and these guys just rezzing each other and running down the corridor, and I'm just cutting them down. And there's so many situations like that. And I've also had a lot of times where I'll run around a corner, 2-3 guys, you're down, and lots of awkward moments where you just get caught out, or there's people behind you, or something that I find I get all the time is I've just made a bit of progress, I come forward and I get hit from the side because you can't watch enough of the areas because it's so claustrophobic. There's always a guy above you or behind you or beside you, and you just get caught out all the time. And I find that kind of gameplay really frustrating because you always feel like there wasn't anything you could really do there. It's sort of you've been you're not in control, and there's almost no way for you to be in control because there's so many positions in Talar where people can hide. And I don't like the word camp necessarily, but people can just create an unbalanced sort of situation for yourself. And
there's no way to fully anticipate your foe and without at least spending the proper amount of time. And basically, if you take the time to move through an area into Law Market tactically, that time that you take will be enough time for somebody to just randomly flank up behind you while you're checking off the points. And so it really does turn into a little bit more of an arena shooter when you implement a map like that. Yeah,
you have no choice but to move fast around the map and just hope that you have the right engagements, and depending on which game you play and what team you're facing, that will play out. But I just, like you say, when I'm moving around the map, and this is how I find with Marquez and Azadi, you can move point to point, you can move street to street, from cover to cover, and you can think, okay, I'm clear left, clear right, move up the road, move down the road, I can see these guys, and then my team's over here on my right hand side. So you have a good kind of mental map as you're moving around, thinking about what you want to do. You cannot do that on Talar. It's impossible. There's so many structures and buildings on all this kind of stuff. So overall, I think if I had to say out of the whole map, one that I sort of did not prefer, it would probably be Talar. But it's still not a bad map. Like I said, I think it's very interesting the way they've laid out.
It looks beautifully visually, and I've had a lot of fun moments trying to get my C4 kills to unlock the crossbow up on those little rooftops, throwing C4 down into the alleyways as people run by. I mean, it was a lot of fun, and it looks awesome with that like sheet metal stuff hanging off the roofs there, and people shooting through the sheet metal. It just looks very cool, but ultimately it'd be nice if maybe there were some big roadblocks here and there to try and make more of a lane-centric map.
But on the other hand, if we just had another map that was very similar to Azadi and Marquez, then again we'd have a DLC where all the maps were quite similar. So I think it's actually good that they've thrown in these different ones, and Epicenter again is very different. We haven't talked so much about Epicenter compared to the other ones, but it is very different. Epicenter is very interesting again because of all the sort of the kind of like micro scenery. It's not so much just kind of block buildings. Epicenter is great because you have almost lots of very miniature little areas which are very well designed in their own right, whereas the other maps tend to be like block buildings, streets. Whereas Epicenter, it feels like a kind of, I guess I would say like diorama. It's like, what I mean? It's sort of set up as this one whole thing. It's all, every little area doesn't feel copied. Often you can get that with Battlefield. You feel like they've placed down building A2 on a certain area. I don't feel like that with Epicenter. It feels like every area has been specifically designed.
What I like so much about Epicenter is the width of each of the roads. And if you've played this map, well, I know you haven't, but on 64 player maps on Epicenter, that giant highway in the middle dissecting it all of a sudden becomes this massive battle. You got like 20 guys on one end of the freeway shooting over, 20 guys on the other, and then you got the rest of the team trying to cross over and flank around. And you can sort of just stand back and take it all in, and it's this massive urban battle. It looks quite amazing.
It would be awesome. I mean, I can totally imagine you'd have sort of, you know, your snipers at the far range, you'd have your sort of support players a bit further forward, your assault guys right at the front battling through, and all this kind of smoke explosions, grenades, machine gun fire laying down all across the way, and yeah, really does sound like an awesome sort of scene there, I think. So I think this is a good place to come and wrap it up for today, and we've been talking about Aftermath today, new DLC. If you haven't picked it up yet and you haven't decided whether you want to, I would really strongly advise you to. There's lots of good videos, breakdowns, reviews of the map, so go and seek those out, find out what it's all about. And thinking forward into the next Battlefield, would Aftermath be more what you would like to see in the next Battlefield compared to some of the other DLCs we've seen, like Close Quarters and Armored Kill? Let us know in the comments, drop some thoughts there. So thanks for watching. This has been Luetin and Levelcap. We'll see you next time for another episode of On The Level.